Well, then we'll go ahead and get started. Just want to say thank you to everyone for attending today's Flexi webinar, for taking a little bit of time out of your day to spend it with us to get to know Flex a little bit better. So today, Aaron Clapp is going to be presenting on how to use layers in Flexi. And so he'll give that presentation for about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for questions. So if you do have any questions, either about layers or anything you want to know about Flexi or about the universe in general, I'm sure Aaron's equipped to handle all those questions. So you can just type those into the chat window there at the bottom. And if you think about them during the presentation, you can type them then or after the fact. And we'll try and answer as many of those as we can get through. And just as a general answer already, we will be recording today's webinar and we'll post that to our YouTube channel, and we'll send everyone out a link. So if you have to leave partway through or you want to send it to one of your colleagues or employees or something, we will be recording it, so we will send that link to you so you can view it at any time. And with that, we'll turn it over to Aaron.
All right, sounds good. All right, so today we're just going to kind of do a brief overview of what layers is all about and kind of what are the options. Then we'll kind of look at some bigger picture scenes and where you might use some of this. But first thing I like to do is let's just go over all the buttons and see what it's all about. So the first thing, we've got a blank document open here, and the way that you find the layers is by selecting this little button up here, right next to the color palette wheel. It's the design editor. This window will come up, and the nice thing is about this window is it is resizable, so you can make it any size you want to kind of fit your design space. Or you can also go to the view menu and pull it up under here. Or if you like the shortcut, it's the letter E on your keyboard. So kind of just the basics here. We have two main tabs, your layers and your objects tab. Both of these will have things about it that we're going to go over, and we'll start with the layers. So first thing, we'll kind of start out with the easy stuff, but it's important to know that they're there, and that is new layer, delete a layer, if you want to duplicate a layer, and then we have this little funny button over here that's to empty the trash. So if we click on this, obviously it's going to just create a new layer on top of the existing one. I can quickly and easily name these whatever I want. I can just call this like something like border, and I can quickly just kind of go through here and give them names and customize them however I want. I can take an existing layer, and if I want to duplicate that and add something to it, the easiest way to do that is hit that duplicate layer. The next thing I could do is obviously I can select a layer and I can delete it, and I can get rid of layers this way or modify them and such. This little guy we'll kind of get into a little bit more, but this empties the trash. Flexi does save items that you delete, and so if you've deleted something and you didn't mean to delete it, Flexi can recover that. And this is just how you empty the cache, basically, of your trash. In case you've thrown something away that has a very large size, you may want to clear out the memory or get that out of the way, and then go from there. The next thing here is these are kind of your basic type of icons that you're going to see in most layering programs. You're going to see the visible layer. This is going to be your printable, if it's printable or not, whether it's edible or not, or editable or not edible. And then your cut layer. So if you want to cut something like this or not. So quick and easy. We've got our grid hidden. If we show it, this will show and hide our grid. If I put in some guidelines, if I drag some guidelines from the side, I may want to display them for a time and then get rid of them. I can hide or show them. Interestingly enough, I'm not sure why you might want to do this, but you could also cut your guidelines if you want to. I guess if you were setting up some kind of custom weeding border or something like that, you could cut your guidelines and you could even print your guidelines. You can also print your grid. You can also show and hide your substrate. The substrate is an interesting one. Not a lot of people use this. It's kind of an interesting feature, but if you go into your Design Central and you're setting up your plate, by default everything's set to transparent, but I could actually set my substrate color. So that little bounding box that you see here, you can add a substrate, and then you can actually decide if you want to actually cut that substrate or print it or show and hide that if you want to. So
Okay,
this
Aaron.
is kind of, yes.
You just had a request to slow down a little bit with the mouse
Okay,
movements as well, just
gotcha.
to make it
Okay,
easy so everyone can follow what you're doing.
no problem. So
Thanks.
kind of as a quick recap then on here is you've got your hide and show, which is the eye. If I click on it, you get a little X that's going to show that it's uh, not visible or visible. And then our printable layer, this is going to be something you can actually print on your large format printer if you want. You can enable it or disable it. Again, the editable option, this is helpful if you want to lock something into place and you don't want it to change. Really helpful if you're dealing with multiple layers and you're trying to move something around. I'm sure many of you have been in one of those cases where you're trying to select something just right and trying to move it and you accidentally drag something from the behind and you don't mean to drag that and it becomes difficult. You can make this editable or lock it in place so that it doesn't move. And then that last one is your cuttable tab. So I can cut something out. You might have parts of your design that you may want to include or not include in a cut file. So that's kind of the basics here. Then also, one quick other note is that you do have some colors on the right-hand side here. These colors are kind of interesting. Let me just draw a few things on screen. So I'm going to draw star here, and can we get a fill to that? Maybe not. Oh, I'm in my guide layer. That's why. Oh, another thing to note, I guess, is if you're depending on what layer you're in will depend on what kind of things get created in there. So I'm going to rename this just to layer 1 because this is what shows up by default. So it's kind of easier for us to identify. So I'm going to draw in layer 1. And let's just see here. Let me maybe create a new layer. And I'm going to go into layer 2 and create another shape. I'm going to just give it a different color. All right, so one thing you'll notice here is this color on the right-hand side up in your design editor is that when I select the object, that color is going to kind of reference what I've selected. So if I have multiple layers turned on and I select an object, it's going to highlight in the name or in the color of the layer that I've assigned. Now, the way that you can assign this is simply by right-clicking and going to properties. You also have a lot of your other options here, like if you want to rename, duplicate, delete, or add a new layer. If I go to properties, some of these same buttons that you see back in the background are also shown up in here. I can make this a master layer, which kind of makes it your primary layer with all the components in it. I'll kind of get that once we get into the object section. We'll kind of discuss more what the master layer is about. Typically, we don't need to change that for the most part, but it can be changed. And then here's where we can change our color. So if I want this to be a different color, I can. And so this kind of it's not real obvious. It's kind of more of a subtle thing. But when you select an object in a certain layer, it will display a different color. So this one's like a darker blue, and this one's like a light blue. So you can kind of quickly identify what layer the object you've selected is in. So this is an obviously customizable thing. I want to say that if you do things by default, I want to say it's either red or blue, one of the two, as a default color. So that's kind of the real basics. One of the things that you can do, and we'll kind of discuss this in the Objects tab too, is if you want to move layers around, you can do so just by dragging and dropping. If I grab this layer and I just select it, you see this little dotted line that I'm seeing here? This allows me to kind of put this underneath layer 1, and when I do so, it instantly changes on screen. So now my red arrow, my burgundy arrow, is below my black star, and so I can do this as much as I want. Real easy, and this is the way you can rearrange layers if you need to put things on top of each other. Let's go over to the Object tab. Now we kind of get a general picture of this is how we build layers, and this is how we can kind of stack things on top of each other. There's another part of the layers that Flexi offers here, and this is the Objects tab. The Object tab tells you what's in each layer. So if I expand these by hitting that little plus symbol, it lowers this down, and I can get some information about the master page. Now I told you we're going to go over that master page. So basically what we have here, the master page holds things like the guide, the grid, your substrate, and usually your trash can. Typically you don't need to change the master page. You can if you want to rename it or whatnot, but typically for the most part we're going to leave this the same. But it can be, you can change another layer to be your master if you need to. For now, we're going to leave it the same because we've got our page 1, which is going to contain all of our layers. All files are going to have a master page and then a page 1. Page 1 is typically where you're going to do most of your designing in. As you can see, when I open up and I start to dial into some of these layers, I can actually start to see some of the objects that are in my file. If I click on this burgundy arrow, it's actually going to highlight over here, and then I can appropriately select that object and then maybe rename it, or I can move it around, or maybe you're looking for a specific object. Maybe you're looking for a particular object that's in here and it's really hard to kind of see on screen, especially maybe if you have a graphic that's kind of overlapping itself and has lots of complexity to it. You might be hard struck to kind of select it because it's behind everything, and it might be easier for you to just come in here, and if I click on it, it automatically selects it for me. So then I can just go on screen and move it around, or do whatever I want from here. I can even delete it right from in here if I don't want it anymore. I can use the Control Z to undo that if I want, and that undoes it. I can drag and drop as well. So let's just pretend, or say I don't need layer 2, and I've just decided that I want both of these objects in layer 1. Just like we did in the Layers tab, I can select this and start to drag it around. So you get the little line there. So if I drag it here, it's going to go underneath the star, but if I just drop it into layer 1, it's going to put it on top of the star. I'm going to go ahead and throw it underneath the star. So I just drag and drop like that, and now my star is in the same layer as my star, but it's underneath it. So real kind of a easy to see user interface. Here's another kind of a cool way you can do it is, let's just say let's stack up several objects here together. Let's kind of make a hodgepodge of stuff here, color it different things. And this looks a little bit chaotic, I know, but what we can do is I can select an object on screen, and if I right click on it, I can select my ordering options. Another way to do that, if maybe it's hard to click on and I have it selected, is I could also go to my arrange menu, and I can do it from here if I want to. order. So these are the same options. So let's say I want to go forward or back one. I can say forward, and you'll notice that on the right-hand side here where my thing is, it's moving itself up. So you're going to see live how that stuff moves in relationship to each other. So if you have multiple objects that you need to rearrange the stacking order so that the visual appearance is correct, then I can come in here and move it forward one until it's correct visually. Or if I prefer to do it in a more of a drag and drop style fashion, that's just as easy as drag and drop just like that. And I can do that with any of these objects. I can put them behind or up front if I want and move my objects around like that. This can get kind of complicated too. So let's just weld all these together. Another kind of interesting thing is that as I do different things, so when I apply an outline or a contour cut or a weld, or if I do some kind of a compound, those objects will show up as compounds, welds, contour cuts right in here, so it'll be easy to identify it. What's kind of interesting and cool about the weld option is that, let's say that for whatever reason, I want that oval. And I'm like, well, I don't want to have to unweld everything. I can actually go into the layer, dial into that weld, select that object, and even though the object is welded together, I can select that individual piece, right click on it, and say copy, and then maybe I could paste it over here. Oh, I don't know why it's asking me to save the file, but uh-oh. Anyway, that's not supposed to happen, but I should be able to copy and paste the object over. Let's try it one more time, see if it gives me that same problem here. Well, this is what happens when you don't restart your Flexi very often. So I'm going to leave that one be for now. It's probably just a bug because I tried it earlier and it was working. But for saving time, folks, you should be able to copy and paste it and copy files right out of here. Let's see if this will work. Well, there we go. A little bit different way of doing it. In that way, the way I did that was I held down the control key as I was dragging it, and it automatically does a duplicate for me. So now we can see we can actually grab this now, and I can separate it from the main design. Let's take a look at something a little more interesting instead of just basic shapes. I have a file loaded up here that I want to show you that I've kind of built. It's a real simple file, and this kind of shows us kind of a real simple design that somebody has created, and it's got all kinds of different elements in it that I want to kind of show you. So we'll open up the master page and page one. Oh, by the way, also real quick, let's go back to our shapes page here. I didn't mention the trash. I can pull out any items from the trash, like I'd mentioned before. So if I delete this, now my object gets stored in the trash can. I can actually pull these right out of the trash and put them into a layer if I want to, and it brings them back from the dead, so to speak. So if I've deleted objects, I can always pull them back. Now, there is a limit to how many items that you can store inside of the trash can. By default, it's 10. You can edit that, though. If you go into your Flexi and you hit Edit, go to Preferences, and then right in here, there's a trash can capacity. I'm not actually sure what the limit is here. There may not be one. It actually is probably limited to how much memory you have on your computer. You can store a ton of objects in the trash. Again, this may be something that just kind of be aware of when you're working with a file that's large. And let's say you have a big bitmap that you've imported in and you no longer need it. You've maybe modified it or something, and you no longer need it, and you hit delete and you import a different picture in. That is still kind of in the memory of the software. And if it was a really massive file, you may actually be interested in going into the objects or into the layers tab here in your design editor and just hitting that empty trash can so that when you come back into the trash, that file is no longer there. Because Flexi does store that in the memory. Just something to kind of keep in mind, especially if the file starts to get a little sluggish. Check your trash. If there's something in there you don't need that's really big, get rid of it. That might help a little bit. All right, so let's go back to that other file. And I've set up several layers. I've set up a black text layer, the white checkered pattern. I've got some body shop text here. I got the outline separated into a different layer. I've got the black checkered pattern, the red background, and the yellow outline. And in my objects, if I open up my page one, I've got each layer, and inside of each layer, I've got different objects. So I can open all these up, and it shows me what they are. They're compounds. And if I open up them even farther, I find that this particular object, if I click on it, this is the checkered compound. And again, it shows me that layer color. So if I were to go back in here, I can see that checkered pattern, oh, it's the blue layer. And then I can even dial in even farther and select individual paths inside of that compound. So really helpful, again, if you're trying to select something that's compounded together like that and you need to get at that piece, the nice thing about selecting something like this is that I can go in here now and I can change the properties of that compound. So I can change it to whatever color I want, and it makes it really easy going back and editing your files. If you kind of plan ahead and do some of this, I know it's a little more extra work and sometimes it takes a little more planning, but if you ever had to go back and change the colors for whatever reason, this is way easier than having to tear apart a file after the fact, uncompound it, do a bunch of stuff to it. It might be buried under layers of outlines and shadows. You can just simply find any object in here, change the color, and you move on. So kind of nice and easy way to change colors on objects. I'm going to put that back to black. I'm going to do an example here. So one of the things that I can do is I'm going to demonstrate just again the ability to grab one of these layers. I'm just going to drag it to the top, and that's going to change my design a little bit. So now that P goes behind there. So there's that drag and drop type functionality that it gives us. Again, I've got each one of these layers at a slightly different color. I can grab any one of these objects and just move it to a different layer if I want to, or a different layer. So I can put it right underneath this guy if I want to. Now, changing that will obviously, it might actually change your design, so just kind of be aware of that. But you can move and drag around things as much as you want inside of the screen to kind of reorganize or relayer any kind of design. Another use for these layers is I know of kind of a famous company that we used to offer their products. I think now they're independent, is bad wraps. Bad wraps can be used in conjunction with bad wrap TIFFs is what they are, and they're layered DXF files. So you can find a lot of good companies out there that make templates for vehicles that have different layers set up for them so that you can mask off different vehicles and things like that. Like I said, there's a lot of different companies that do templates and window tints and all kinds of stuff like that. I'm just going to use Bad Wraps as an example. It's just because it has a really cool feature that I really like, and it uses layers really, really well. So I'm going to open up this bad wrap, and it's just the back end of a truck. And so I just went online and I found a really high resolution image of the US flag. And if I look at my layers, this thing is full of layers. It's got a design layer. You can turn on and off your measurements for the file if it has one. Um, you've got some different things here. You can turn on and off the logo. So you've got all these different layers, and the way this one in particular is intended to work is you put your objects inside of the design layer. So when I grabbed this flag, what I did was I went into the design layer, I selected it, I imported the file, and then it showed up under objects. So I'm going to go to page 1, design layer, and here's my US flag that I imported. I can click on it, select it, move it around, do whatever I want to it. And this particular type of TIFF file or layered file kind of helps me do a unique thing. Here's something else that's kind of interesting. If I decide to turn off all these layers, let's just turn off one by one each one of these. Now you can kind of see like a stripped down version of what it's going to cut out. I can even keep turning off all these layers, and now here's my original JPEG. So you can kind of see it's nothing special, just an image that I copied on, but it kind of gives you a good idea. You can show a customer what it might look like. I know that we also have in our sign design elements, we also have some different vehicle wrap templates and stuff like that that have some layers in it. And you can use the design editor and move those layers around to kind of create a similar effect. I'm going to turn all these back on. So I can, here's an interesting layer. If I turn on and off the perf layer, it will show me what it might look like inside of the window or outside of the window. So there's a lot of uses for layers. This is kind of a high level, kind of a big picture type of thing. You could show a customer what it might look like from the back or from the side. It could be something as simple as our body shop design here. The great thing about this is using these layers and doing this is that at any point, if I need to go into one of these layers and change colors, I can do that at kind of whenever I want. Very helpful for that kind of thing. Or if you like to turn on and off layers and grids and things like that, this is where you're going to do that as well. So I can turn on my grids, kind of help that manage, or my guidelines, things like that. I can modify what I want to print, what I don't want to print. One last example I'll kind of go over. This particular file is really good at this particular thing, is if I go to cut. So let's turn off the grid because we don't need that. Let's say I want to take this to print or to cut, and I was cutting this just out of colored vinyl. I could go to my cut plot screen up here, and there's a fairly new feature in Flexi, which is color by or cut by layer. So I can actually order my cuts by layer instead of by color. So, again, this is just another way of doing something. You can cut some objects by layers. You can group all of your color options by layers. You can sort them by layers, things like that. So there's multiple applications, not only just organization, but you can also use it to organize what you cut and in what order. This might also help you in terms of what objects you might want to have it cut first versus cut last type of thing. So you can use that as kind of a tool for organizing cuts, even if they're all the same color. Or maybe you would prefer it to cut, this object over here first before it moves on to other things on the right or the left-hand side of the plotter. That might be another use for the layers. I want to kind of say that it doesn't get used as often, these layers, but I think if you kind of play with it, there's a lot of potential possibility for organizing something. It does take a little extra time to set up, but the nice thing is that once you go back to it, honestly, from my perspective, being in tech support for so long, I've talked to a lot of people that just throw everything onto one layer, and then when they want to go back to find something and edit it, it's a lot of work to have to go back because they've got to sort through layers, and maybe you click on stuff and you can't, well, is that the right thing? I don't know. And it can become very complicated. So this makes it a little easier just to kind of handle things. And then that way you don't have to stress out so much when you have to go back to the file and reproduce a different color, or they change of design, or even if you just want to change the text or something like that. If it's a standard design, you can put your text on one layer and then the design on a different layer, so that you could just delete all the text all at once and not have to, you could lock up one of these other layers. So for example, let's say I want to keep the yellow outline, and I want to get rid of everything else. I'm going to make the yellow outline by clicking up here, non-editable. I'm going to delete everything, and now everything is deleted. Or let's say I want to keep the yellow outline and maybe just the text. That's all I want to keep. I can go in here, select the objects, and delete them. Okay, not deleting. Let's try doing this. Oh, I don't want to delete layer. Let's try deleting. There we go. So it's letting me delete certain parts, but not others. So I can kind of get rid of parts of the piece while keeping certain parts of the layers intact. So it should allow me to delete the, and if I am in the correct layer, this is the checkered. There we go. You have to be in the layer to delete it, looks like, in some cases. But anyway, so lots of different uses. Hopefully it kind of makes sense. I know it's kind of a brief, quick, fast overview of layers, and there's a ton of uses it could have, but let's check and see if we have any questions regarding that.
We'll go ahead and do questions. Thank you so much, Aaron, for going over all of that. So folks, if you do have any questions, you feel free to go ahead and type them into the chat window on the bottom there. We do have a couple that came up during the presentation, just a couple of quick recaps. Tammy said, can you lock layers so they don't move while working on another layer?
Yes, you can. And that's what that pencil, that little pencil is. So if I, let's take this, I'm going to make everything else editable except for the yellow outline. So now I can't even select the yellow outline. I can move everything else around, but I cannot move that yellow outline. So that permanently puts it in place, does not allow me to change it at all.
Awesome.
So that's what that little pencil's for.
Okay. And then Skylar said, when you select an object, should it highlight the layer it is in?
It won't highlight the layer that it's in. It will highlight under the Objects tab. So if we have multiple layers in here, it'll highlight what object it's in. So if I have all of these, let's close all these down, and I choose the checkered pattern again, it automatically opens up the checkered pattern layer and then shows me what object it was. Unfortunately, it doesn't show it to you in this layer, mainly because it's trying to limit you to what you can do based on a layer. So when you're clicked on a layer, you're editing that layer. And so anything that's in any other layers, and you need to edit anything or move anything, typically you change layers to do that. I don't think it's completely necessary. I think I could still do some deleting. Yeah. Let's see, now it was the black. Let's go to the red background and then try and delete the checkered pattern. Yeah, it still lets me. Okay, so it does still let me. It's just if you're, it's one of those things you kind of have to kind of keep track of though. It's easy to lose track of where you're at with layers. Whatever layer you have selected, that's the one that you're actually editing inside of.
All right. Let's see. Another question. Angela said, does Flexi only store the trash in the current file, or will it show in the next file you open?
That's a good question. Let's look at the. I know it won't store stuff, I don't think, from other files. It'll only store things from this file, but let's just save this file for a second. And then I'm going to close it. And let's just reopen that file and see if it pulls up the trash. That's kind of actually something I'm kind of curious about here. Let me pull that up here. That is a Flexi file, so I'm going to sort it by Flexi files. Okay. Okay, so it does not look like it saves the trash. So the trash is a volatile type thing. So as long as you have the file open, the trash is available. When you close the file, the trash does go away. So it's very memory dependent, and it's not able to pull trash from other files. But if you have multiple files open, you should be able to go to. So I can go over to my bad rat file over here, and if I had something in my trash can, which I don't, so let's just try deleting something. I can take that, and I should be able to copy it, which this may be a large file. It is, and then go to my body shop file and paste it here.
All right.
So there's my bitmap. So I can, and it'll take a second to load here. And why did it not load in? I should be able to do this. Now, oh, you know what? This is a bitmap from, that's not going to work in this case because those bad wrap files are kind of protected. So anything I try and copy out of those files are probably not going to work. But
Okay.
if I were to take a generic file, it should work. But those files are specifically protected because they don't want you copying stuff outside of those files.
Okay. Well, we do have a couple requests here to talk about the master layer.
Okay. So
What is the master layer?
the master layer is kind of it's kind of a, what we use it for is a placeholder for um, keeping the objects on screen that you're probably not going to either print or cut necessarily. So for example, the guide, these are something that you're typically not going to print or anything like that. Um, and that's kind of contained in that master page. Um, I've never typically seen a reason why you'd want to change it. Now you can. The master layer, one of the things about the master layer too is it always goes on top. It's always on top of everything. So if I turn on my guides, my guidelines are always on top of whatever my design is. So that's another attribute of the master layer. So let's say that you had a design that you were, or something that you wanted to be on top of your design at all times, and you wanted to work around that type of object or maybe that kind of design, or maybe it's some kind of a template you're working with, you could theoretically make that the master layer and it'll always be on top. So anything that you place on top of it would be behind it. Um, mainly the reason why we use that is that because we like to put our guidelines in there, our grid, and things like that. Now the grid is going to be one of the ones that's going to go underneath. It's in the master layer, but under the layers we've decided that so it's going to go underneath everything else. So the master page doesn't always have to be that it's always on top, but it can mean that. You can move some of these things so that they're below other things. I've not ever. Now I could be wrong. Now I'm not a. I would say that I know the software pretty well, but there might be a case out there that I've not heard of that you would want to change the master page. I've not done it a lot in the designs that I've worked on, mainly because I feel like this is kind of already pretty pre-established, and I don't necessarily need to change any of this, and that for the most part I can do any of my layering or stacking or anything like that in your standard layers under page one. Again, there might be a good circumstance out there for that, and if you've used it, man, I'd love to hear about it because I'm always up for learning things. But um, most of the time I typically don't change a whole lot in there, just because that's where kind of the core functions of the software, like the background, all that kind of stuff is built. This is something that shows up every time you open a new file. But let's try just something that came to my head here. Let's just try. I can move stuff into the master layer. Let's just throw it into the. It looks like it won't let me put it under the master page, but I can always make another page the master layer, or it makes it a master type layer. So um, so now my body shop layer shows up as a master layer. There's I I'll be honest, I don't see a real great use for why you'd want to put something into the master layer versus remove it. There's a few things that I can think of, maybe kind of like very rare circumstances, but for the most part, it's just a container that holds kind of our core functions of the software, like the grids and stuff. Hopefully that answers the question, but
Okay, yeah, thank you. Let's see, I had a question from Carol. She said, how to make something transparent after you vectorize it? For example, the text.
okay. So once you've made it, once you've vectorized something, so let's just take this guy right here, or this text here. Typically, the way I'd make something transparent, if it's vector, is by going to your fill stroke editor, and then under your color. Oh wait, hold on. It's not transparent. It's not going to be listed under color. It's going to be here. You can set it to no fill, and that will make it transparent. Or if you do a solid fill, I believe if you hit transparent, it'll send it to no fill. So you can either set it to no fill in here under your fill stroke editor, or if you go down to your color bar down here and click on this little transparent color, it'll automatically set it to no fill. That's how you do that.
Okay, awesome. So it looks like we're almost out of time. Guess we can answer one or two more questions. We have one from Jake. He said, is there a way to use Flexi to output cut files for ESCO cutting tables?
ESCO cutting tables. It's possible, I suppose. I'm not super familiar with ESCO. Let me see here. I guess it depends on what kind of format of file they're looking for. So this probably, we don't have drivers for ESCO specifically in our driver list, but so we couldn't output using the production manager. But if the machine will take something as simple as like a DXF file or like an Illustrator file or a PDF with lines with vector art in it, we could simply do something like that, and that would probably work. So if we had a file like this and we wanted to cut this out, you could probably export this file in a number of formats. We do offer a DXF. We also offer PDF that you could export to if it will read that. Those are the two probably most common ones that you're going to find. If it'll take those formats as a raw drawing file, then yes, you could do that. If not, then we probably wouldn't be able to send to it since we don't have the drivers in our production manager.
One more question. Tammy said, can you do opacity fill, like 50% opacity?
Yep, you sure can. So let's just grab a shape here. I'm going to color it. Let's do some light colors here. Whoop. And let's set my black star here. I'm going to go to my fill stroke editor again. I'm going to go to this third tab here that says transparency. Click on that. I can choose a blend mode. There's a bunch of them here. I'm going to be honest, I don't know what the difference between all of them are, but you can kind of play around with them. There are some slight subtle differences between them, but I can just set my opacity to 50% here, hit tab, and now that will change my opacity. So now I get like basically mix that black and that green together to make a different color.
Okay. Perfect. Well, folks, I think that's about all the time we have for today. Aaron, what would be the best way for them to contact if they have any other questions about doing things in Flexi with layers or any other general questions?
Yeah, if they have any questions, give us a call at our tech support number. It's 800-229-9044. That'll get you right to our tech support department. We can help you with any designs or questions like that. I noticed there's a question about 10.5 and the role in VG2. Give us a call. We can check the driver lists for you to see if it's available. So any kind of question. So if you're looking out there buying a new machine, you want to know if the new version of our software supports us, give us a ring. We can look it up for you. You need just help kind of getting through something or struggling with an issue or something like that, give us a ring. We're more than happy to help.
Okay. Wonderful. Aaron, well, we just want to say thank you again for doing this and answering all those questions, going over everything.
No problem.
And
My pleasure.
yeah. And just want to let everyone know that we will be having another webinar next month. So let me just look up the exact date here for you. And if you do ever have any questions that you want us to cover more in depth, just feel free to type it in the chat window there. We'll look at those comments, or you can send us an email, and then we can do more in-depth training on those. But the next webinar will be on October 8th, and we'll be talking about using the point editing tools. So like regular, we'll send you out an email so that you can sign up for that webinar, and we'll send you an email today with the link to today's recording. And so thank you all so much for coming, and we'll see you next month.